General Hospital spoilers reveal that what began as a day of promise and ceremonial joy for Willow quietly and horrifically mutated into a crucible of emotional devastation. As the weight of hidden obsessions and long-buried secrets finally imploded around her with full force. The wedding between Willow and Drew had been built on months of preparation and hope. Constructed delicately upon the belief that, after enduring so many losses and betrayals, Willow could finally find peace. She had told herself that Drew represented stability, that he was safe. Loyal, unwavering. The guests gathered with anticipation, the ceremony unfolding under elegant arches and candlelight. But underneath the scripted rituals and carefully arranged floral displays, danger pulsed like a fault line about to rupture. What Willow did not yet understand was that her future was already crumbling. Its foundation eroded by the dangerous obsessions that Curtis and Mina had allowed to fester, until neither of them could stay silent. The wedding did proceed, vows were spoken, rings exchanged. A kiss sealed the moment, but the air was heavy, and many of those in attendance sensed something off, some unseen current shifting beneath the surface. Mina's composure had been deteriorating for days, fraying under the unbearable tension of the truth she had kept hidden. Curtis had long known that Drew was not the man he portrayed himself to be. And the moment Drew placed that ring on Willow's finger, Curtis knew the damage was done. The ceremony was over, but the reckoning was only beginning. In the days leading up to the wedding, Willow's behavior had already hinted at internal unrest. She had been more withdrawn, more contemplative, almost as if her instincts had been warning her of something she couldn't name. She had moments where she questioned herself, wondered if she was rushing into something, but every time she pushed those thoughts aside, choosing instead to believe in the image Drew projected. That image, however, was not built on truth but on omissions and carefully managed manipulations. As Willow walked into the reception with Drew beside her, smiling at guests, thanking relatives, she felt herself struggling to hold on to the joy she thought she should be feeling. Nina watched from the edges, fighting her own war inside, knowing that everything her daughter had just vowed had been done without the full picture. There had been a time when Nina had considered telling Willow the truth about the brief yet impactful emotional entanglement she'd had with Drew, but she had hesitated, afraid of losing the fragile bond she had finally begun to rebuild with her daughter. But watching Willow smile at a man who had once whispered promises to someone else, promises he never disclosed, broke something open inside her. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about preventing her daughter from becoming another casualty of deception. Curtis, meanwhile, had his own reason for watching from a distance. He had followed Drew's patterns, studied the discrepancies, confirmed the interactions that Drew had thought were buried. He knew the exact timeline of Drew's involvement with Mina and had proof of how Drew had used Mina's trust, her influence, and her emotional vulnerabilities to his advantage. Curtis had been prepared to speak up before the wedding but had stepped back when Nina pleaded with him to wait. Now, seeing the couple celebrated as if nothing were wrong, seeing Willow step into this marriage unaware, he could no longer remain silent. And so, at the height of the reception, when toasts were being made and laughter echoed across the grand hall, Curtis stepped forward. He didn't shout, didn't cause a scene. His presence alone turned heads. When he reached Willow and Drew, silence spread like a wave through the room. Nina rose too, no longer able to restrain herself. The truth spilled forth not in anger, but in trembling. Measured words that cut deeper than any outburst ever could. Nina's voice was calm but sorrowful, her confession raw and pained. She told Willow everything, about her emotional involvement with Drew, about the timing, about the lies of omission. She didn't try to dress it up. She told the truth. Curtis supported her claims, confirming that the betrayal wasn't a fantasy or a misunderstanding, but a calculated concealment. The guests were stunned into disbelief. Willow stood motionless, the blood draining from her face, the walls of her wedding day collapsing inward. The realization hit her all at once, not just that Drew had lied, but that everyone around her had been watching this unfold, carrying truths too poisonous to keep contained. The man she had just married had allowed her to walk into a lifelong commitment blind. He had robbed her of choice. She saw Drew standing there, his expression carefully composed, already shifting into damage control, and she realized she didn't even recognize the man before her. What shattered Willow was not only the betrayal but the clarity that came with it. She remembered every soft promise Drew had whispered, every moment he had encouraged her to trust him completely, and now she could see that those moments had been carefully constructed. She wasn't mourning the loss of a wedding, she was mourning the loss of her belief in her own ability to see people clearly. The emotional devastation was deeper than heartbreak. It was identity-breaking. She had chosen Drew because she believed he was different, believed he was her safe place after years of loss. And now, as reality sunk in, she realized she had been manipulated again, only this time with far greater precision. She didn't scream. She didn't cry in front of the guests. She simply walked away. The veil slipped from her hair as she left, trailing behind her like a ghost of the life she thought she was beginning. Guests tried to make sense of what had just occurred. Some tried to console Drew, others turned to Nina with blame in their eyes. But none of it mattered to Willow anymore. She locked herself away for days after that, unable to speak to anyone. Not to Carly, not to Michael, not even to Wiley. The isolation was complete. The silence in her mind became a prison, echoing with questions she couldn't answer. Had Drew ever loved her? Had Nina's intentions been pure? Had Curtis done the right thing? Everything she had built emotionally was now rubble. And in that rubble a new obsession grew, not with revenge, but with understanding how she could have let this happen again. The shame, the betrayal, and the self-doubt fused together into something corrosive. Willow no longer trusted herself. She no longer believed she could distinguish love from performance. Meanwhile, Drew tried to salvage his reputation, insisting that what he had with Nina had been over before Willow. That it didn't matter. But the truth was that it did matter. It mattered because he never told her. He took away her agency. He let her walk into marriage with blind trust. And that made his crime one of quiet cruelty. Nina, though vindicated in her confession, was again shut out by Willow, who could not stomach that her mother had chosen that moment to act. It didn't matter that Nina had told the truth. It mattered that she waited. That she let Willow put on the dress, recite the vows, wear the ring before tearing it all down. Curtis, standing firm in his actions, became the villain in Drew's eyes and a symbol of disruption to others. But he didn't regret it. He had done what no one else would. And in doing so, he had perhaps given Willow the only chance she had to escape a deeper lie. What haunted Willow most in the weeks that followed was not the collapse of the wedding, but the realization that she had never truly escaped the cycle of being controlled by others. From Harmony to Nina, from Michael to Drew. Every major relationship in her life had been marked by manipulation and half-truths. Her obsession now was with clarity, with truth. But truth came at a devastating cost. The wedding, meant to be a symbol of rebirth, had become a funeral for her own trust in people. The woman who emerged from that experience was no longer soft-spoken and full of hope. She was watchful, distant, unwilling to allow anyone near the core of who she was. And while the world around her moved on, while Drew tried to repair his image, while Nina mourned the relationship she had once hoped to heal, Willow remained suspended in a state of emotional paralysis. This was no longer a story about love. It had become a story about survival. About the long-term damage of betrayal wrapped in affection. And for Willow, it was clear, the wedding may have ended in vows, but what she took with her was not a husband, it was an obsession with never being blindsided again. And that obsession would come to define everything that followed. The story, now spiraling into chaos, has taken an even darker turn as Britt, long thought to have disappeared into the shadows of Port Charles history, emerges with explosive revelations that threaten to burn everything to the ground, especially the carefully crafted image of Drew Kane. What began as subtle tension surrounding Drew's wedding day has now escalated into a full-scale scandal, one rooted not in romantic betrayal alone, but in allegations of criminal misconduct that could shatter reputations, destroy lives, and unravel Drew's future in a matter of moments. The most devastating part isn't that the accusations are coming out, it's who is bringing them to light and when. Britt, once presumed gone and forgotten, has returned with information so damning that it doesn't just ruin a wedding, it sets fire to an entire legacy. This is no longer about whether Drew was emotionally unfaithful, or if he concealed truths about his involvement with Nina. The focus has shifted into territory far more sinister, because Britt is no longer holding back. She carries documents, names, and dates, collected in silence during her absence. She's come back with a purpose, to expose Drew for what she believes he truly is. She speaks not from jealousy or revenge, but from conviction. From experience. From guilt. Her time away was not spent healing, it was spent unearthing secrets. And those secrets now threaten to engulf Drew on what should have been the most important day of his life. The revelation doesn't come as a whisper behind closed doors. It happens in full view. As guests gather, still shaken from Nina's confession and Curtis's intervention, Britt arrives. Her presence alone stuns the room. Whispers ripple, gasps echo, but Britt stands poised, calculated. Not there for ceremony or sentiment, but for justice. She has waited long enough. She steps forward at the height of the reception, clutching a folder that seems far too heavy for its size. And as she speaks, the room grows silent, not out of respect, but out of dread. Because everyone understands immediately, this is not personal. This is surgical. Britt details Drew's involvement in a series of decisions made during his time with the WSB, dealings that crossed ethical lines. Operations that left others in ruin while Drew emerged with clean hands and a curated narrative of survival and heroism. She speaks of falsified records, identities erased, and lives ruined in the name of classified missions Drew orchestrated or benefited from. And perhaps most damning of all, she brings up a covert transaction involving stolen assets, hinting that Drew may have funded parts of his personal and professional resurgence through means that were not just unethical but illegal. Willow stands frozen. This is no longer about a failed romance, it's about realizing that the man she married may be someone entirely different from who he pretended to be. The accusations strike like gunfire. Each word from Britt another bullet to the chest of the ceremony. Drew attempts to interject, but Britt is relentless, backed by evidence and icy resolve. She turns over the folder to Curtis, who has agreed to verify the claims. Curtis, already on edge from earlier revelations, reads through the files and finds them horrifyingly valid. Willow's face drains of all color. It is not the betrayal that devastates her now, it is the shame. The shame of having stood before her friends and family, pledging her life to a man who may have built his future on the suffering of others. The shame of having defended him, of ignoring her instincts. The man she thought would protect her, the man who promised her peace, may have been hiding war behind his smile. Britt's voice doesn't tremble. She doesn't cry. She simply states what she knows, what she's uncovered. What Drew never thought would see the light. And in that moment, Drew's entire world crumbles. His allies withdraw. Carly turns away. Michael looks stunned. Even Sonny, silent in the corner, begins calculating the damage to the Corinthos family name if this spirals further. Because now this isn't just a personal scandal, it's a public indictment. And the setting, Drew's wedding day, makes the timing as destructive as the claims themselves. Willow, overwhelmed and humiliated, steps back from Drew as if seeing him for the first time. Her dress, once a symbol of commitment, now feels like a costume. The man before her is no longer her husband, he is a stranger. And yet, she feels trapped by the ring on her finger. By the ceremony already concluded, by the weight of the lies that now tether her to a man who may have deceived everyone. Britt doesn't stay long after dropping the truth. Her purpose was not to remain but to reveal. Her exit is silent, but her presence lingers like smoke. What she's set in motion cannot be undone. And Drew, left in the ruins of his wedding, must now face a storm of legal, emotional, and social fallout. Investigations begin quietly that night. Curtis begins assembling a report. Nina tries once more to reach out to Willow. But her daughter can barely speak. What was once merely a chaotic love triangle has now become a full-blown disaster involving espionage, corruption, and a staggering betrayal of trust. In the days that follow, Willow isolates herself completely. She cannot reconcile the man she loved with the crimes now associated with his name. She replays every moment, every conversation. Every red flag she ignored. Her obsession now is not with Drew, but with her own failure to see him clearly. She feels violated not just romantically but morally. Drawn into a life of lies that could affect not only her, but Wiley, her career, her future. The public fallout is swift. Media leaks begin. The WSB refuses to comment. The Quartermaines are horrified. Drew, meanwhile, is left scrambling, spinning tales of necessity, of sacrifice, of things done for the greater good. But no one believes him, not entirely. The damage is done. The trust is shattered. And most of all, the marriage is already dead before the ink on the certificate is dry. Willow does not file for annulment immediately. She doesn't have the strength. But she does leave. She walks out of the Quartermaine mansion one morning with nothing but a bag of clothes and a blank stare. Vowing to never again allow herself to be blind to the obsessions of others. The story of Britt's return becomes one of the most defining moments in Port Charles in years, not because she destroyed Drew, but because she forced the truth into the light. And now, as the dust settles, everyone begins to ask the same question: who else has something to hide? Because if Drew could live a double life for this long, what other secrets are waiting to detonate? And for Willow, the obsession is now internal. It is a relentless pursuit of truth, of safety, of emotional clarity. She no longer trusts charming smiles or carefully worded promises. She has become a woman forged by betrayal, hardened by humiliation, and shaped forever by the wedding that turned into a public indictment. The haunting truth is that the man she once called her husband was never hers to begin with. He belonged to the shadows, and now, so does everything they built together. The spiral of destruction that began as whispers around Willow's wedding day has now consumed her entirely. Culminating in a public emotional collapse so devastating that the ceremony itself is halted in real time. The image of the bride, once poised, hopeful, clinging to the belief that her life with Drew represented a new chapter, shatters completely as the weight of compounded betrayals and dangerous secrets descends upon her without mercy. What was intended to be the happiest day of her life has now turned into a scene of overwhelming psychological ruin, forcing an abrupt and immediate suspension of the event. There are no more smiles. No more applause, no more romantic toasts. Only silence, shame, and a bride who can no longer stand beneath the weight of everything being exposed. The wedding venue becomes a war zone of emotional chaos. Willow, still in her gown, stands frozen, her breath shallow and erratic. Her mind racing through the puzzle pieces of deception she has now been forced to arrange. Her body weakens, knees buckling under the shock. Until finally she collapses, physically and emotionally, at the center of the ceremonial platform. Guests gasp. Carly rushes forward. Michael hesitates in horror. The officiant stares helplessly. And Drew. Drew stands alone, watching as the woman he claimed to love is overtaken not by drama, but by collapse. Her trust, her faith, her sense of identity, all of it has been broken by the pressure of compounded lies. Her breakdown doesn't come with screaming or chaos, but with eerie stillness, and then a sudden fall. It is a devastating moment of silence that says more than words ever could. Immediately, the ceremony is stopped. The music cuts out. The guests are ushered back. The cake remains untouched. The flower petals lay undisturbed on the aisle as the room holds its breath. What just happened is not simply a pause in a celebration, it is a confirmation that something catastrophic has occurred beneath the surface. The carefully planned structure of the wedding collapses. But even worse, so does the illusion of control. Everyone present understands that this is no longer a romantic event, it is a crisis. And as the dust begins to settle, something else begins to rise. A new wave of oppressive energy, a force that reveals that the truth was never just a series of exposed lies. It was the trigger for a new form of control. A new order of silence and influence that is now attempting to suppress the consequences of those revelations. What Drew, Nina, and Curtis had all been hiding has now created something far more volatile, a power vacuum in which emotional manipulation, psychological warfare, and public image control are replacing love, honesty, and genuine connection. The adjustments being made now in the aftermath are not meant to heal. They are meant to suppress, to contain, to silence. The suppression begins subtly. Hospital staff are brought in under the pretense of monitoring Willow's condition. But there's no medical emergency that pills can solve. This is emotional collapse from betrayal. Still, she is sedated, kept away from the guests, cut off from immediate communication. Drew insists it is for her safety. But his motivations feel more self-serving, to protect the crumbling narrative of his innocence. Nina tries to get close again. But she is blocked by both family and advisors who now view her as one of the instigators of Willow's destruction. Curtis begins facing questions from both media and those within the community who wonder why he exposed the truth when he did. The entire structure of what should have been a marriage celebration now becomes a battlefield of accusation and damage control. But amid the collapse, something even more sinister is beginning to grow, an undercurrent of chaos that suggests this was only the beginning. The revelations have sparked not just personal grief, but systemic instability. If Drew could hide this much, what else has been buried? If Nina could allow the lie to stretch this far, who else around Willow has chosen silence over truth? The very foundation of trust in Port Charles is beginning to crack, and Willow's very public breakdown is just the first fracture. Because when one truth is exposed, others begin to unravel. Rumors begin to circulate about Drew's deeper ties to the WSB, about financial deals involving unnamed shell corporations, about coerced alliances and altered patient records at General Hospital. The story moves beyond the wedding. It begins to infect the hospital board, the Quartermain estate, and even the Corinthos circle. Everyone is affected. Everyone is forced to reevaluate. And amid all of this, Willow remains out of reach, sedated, shattered, and silent. Her emotional collapse has become a symbol of a larger rot. One that no one can ignore anymore. Meanwhile, Drew begins trying to reassert control, not just over Willow, but over the narrative itself. He arranges press releases that minimize the accusations. He sends private messages to the hospital board. He attempts to reframe what happened as an unfortunate misunderstanding driven by jealousy and emotional instability. But the damage is done. Even as Drew tries to contain the damage, more rifts appear. Carly begins to doubt him. Michael refuses to speak. Sam quietly pulls away. Dante initiates a quiet investigation. The ripples of Willow's collapse continue to spread, reaching into every corner of the community. Her silence becomes an indictment not only of Drew's character but of everyone who allowed his deception to thrive. The suppression efforts, rather than healing the chaos, begin to amplify it. The situation continues to deteriorate. Journalists descend on Port Charles. Old enemies begin to resurface, sensing weakness. The hospital becomes a center of scandal. And through it all, Willow remains absent. Her absence, her silence, and her collapse become symbolic of the emotional cost of secrets, of being used, of trusting the wrong person with your heart. And as Drew tries to salvage his image, he fails to notice that the tide has already turned against him. The obsession now gripping Port Charles is no longer with Drew's sins or Nina's betrayal, it is with the fallout. The instability. The fear that anyone could be the next to fall. Willow's collapse isn't just a personal tragedy. It is a warning. A reminder that behind every perfect image lies something waiting to break. And when it does, it won't just ruin a wedding, it will destroy everything it touches.